Sometimes it feels so good to just sit on top of a hay bale and just talk to you guys. Today's video, I wanted to share something a little bit more personal. And I think I've been withholding this for quite some time from sharing it because, well, it's scary. I still feel shame around it. I'm still scared of kind of what people think about it. And there's a part of me that is scared to even express it still. And it's one of those things that when something like this happens to a person, it affects them their entire life, in which I believe you can get to a point, and you get to a point where it affects you less. And it's not as potent, it's not as triggering, and you can deal with it and handle it and cope with it a lot better. I do believe in that. I do believe I'm at that space. I do believe I've put in a lot of work to get there, a tremendous amount of work. And I wanted to share the impacts on being a father with something like that happening to me. So when I was probably about 8 years old, I was sexually abused by someone I loved and cared and trust deeply. And for a long time, I guess I didn't know it. I suppressed it. I didn't want to look at it. I only remembered that memory of that happening the couple times that it did when I was about 21 years old. I remember, like, to this day, it was probably close around this time, actually. I was 21 years old. And I was laying down in my apartment. At the time, I was living in downtown Grand Prairie in the Cairn building, 6th floor. Beautiful suite, laying on this beautiful purple yoga mat in my beautiful room that had like the mission, the purpose, everything was laid out on it. But I was laying there. And I remember hour, 45 minutes into I think I was doing like a 3-hour meditation. And I remember just like being flooded with these images, flooded with these pictures, flooded with the reminder that this experience happened. And with that flood of images and pictures and stuff came sensations. Came the sensations, came the sounds, came the sights, came the smells, came everything back into my world. And I started crying. I started crying deeply. I could have cried a long time. And then it was like when I remembered, I think it wasn't until a year later that I actually shared that for the first time. Now, I shared that for the first time when I was in California, when I took a life coaching seminar and a life coaching certification from Sean Smith in California when I was there for a week. I shared that for the first time in a group of 17 people. And what a beautiful space to share that in for the first time, because I was accepted with love, with hugs, with honor, with grace, with smiles, with, I'm so sorry you had to experience that. And it was the first time that I felt like I was actually me, where I could reveal my full self. See, that's what shame does, especially with something like this. If you as a man have ever experienced something similar, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. And oftentimes we keep that so secret because we're so ashamed of those moments that we don't share, that I didn't share. I didn't share for a year, let alone 22 years. I held on to that. I suppressed it so bad in my memory that I didn't even remember that happened. I forced myself not to remember it. And that's sad. It's sad. It's sad that I did that. And how one moves through shame around this and with this is by talking about it. Because that is how one reclaims and walks through shame, is by sharing those secrets, sharing those things that we've held on to, especially sexual abuse, especially as a man, because that happens to 1 in 3 men. 1 in 3 men will experience sexual abuse in their lifetime or childhood. That's 1 in 3, and that's reported. That's not even the cases that are unreported. I'm not reported, and I know tons of men who haven't reported theirs as well. And when I shared, like in California, I went through a process as well. He led me through a process, which was beautiful. And I remember it was kind of like Gestalt therapy. So what Gestalt therapy is kind of like going back into a memory and kind of having a conversation and kind of like rewriting the memories. And that's kind of what I did and what I was led through, which really just involved me like crying like a shiznit ton, yelling things that I wish I could have yelled in those moments, like stop or no, or I don't want this. And really owning that voice, because when it occurred and when it was happening, it felt like I didn't have control over saying yes or no. It felt like I had to be quiet. It felt like I had to do whatever was asked. And because I didn't use my voice, because I didn't stand my ground, that's what happened. And so in that process in California, it's like I was back in that moment, back in that memory, rewriting and rescripting and giving myself the voice, giving myself the power to stand up and say no. Stand up and say no, 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 no. And stop. And I don't want this. And that to me was so freeing. And it kind of ignited, which really is still ongoing, this healing process. Like I've been healing. I probably took the first 2 years. I read The Courage to Heal, beautiful book. If anyone has ever experienced sexual abuse, I definitely recommend reading and going through The Courage to Heal. It's by 2 women. It was beautiful from a man, like my own perspective, even though a lot of it was like written for women. I just disregarded the women side of things, and I just focused on the healing and the tools, because everything in there was like a tool to help heal from sexual abuse. So it was beautiful, and that probably lasted, I'd say, 2 years. Like in the start of this journey, actually, which was probably, holy shit, maybe a year, 2 years ago, when I was in that old apartment that overlooked the park, the white one, and I shared the story. It was like the one where I'm like crying and it's like tears of gratitude, but also like sometimes I feel lost. Like that's when I was going through the healing. That's when I was going through healing the sexual abuse that had occurred to me. That's when I was going through the courage to heal. That's when I was like feeling all the emotions and really getting in touch with the pain that the child experienced. Because oftentimes me as an adult brain can rationalize that pain, be like, oh, it wasn't that bad, right? That's kind of what I do to minimize it. It's like, oh, it wasn't that bad. You know, we do that all the time. We experience trauma and then we're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. But what we forget, especially with things when we were a kid, is that when we were a kid, it was terrible. When we were a kid, those things hurt us. When we were a kid, those things affected us. And we often think back with our adult rationale and logic when we don't think of ourselves as the kid that we were back then. Because as the kid that we were back then, probably felt a whole lot of pain no matter what was experienced. We all have traumas per se, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's physical abuse, whether it's emotional abuse, whether it's just any kind of abuse, any kind of trauma, any kind of pain, any kind of moment that has caused hurt and pain and caused you to see the world differently from that, I believe to be a trauma. So it's not about big or small. It's about feeling one's own feelings towards that and getting back in the perspective of being that kid and experiencing that and what was that like and healing that part of me. Because for so long I rejected that kid inside of me. I rejected the little boy who was hurt, the little boy that was punished, the little boy that held on to that, the little boy that was then began to repeat the trauma after again, trying to heal and trying to cope. Healing and seeing that when I was 16 and 17 and selling myself on Craigslist to older men and giving myself away on Craigslist, posting ads being like, I want someone to screw me. I want someone to fuck me. And I don't know why I'm doing this because I don't even like it. Well, clue in, E. You're repeating your trauma because you're trying to solve something. Something inside of you is trying to solve something. That is why you're doing that. And only then did things start to make sense. When I started to see it with the child rationale. And it's wild being a father and going through this. Because it's something that I never want my son to experience. But yet if I look at the statistic that it happens to 1 in 3 children, 1 in 3 people, 1 in 3 men. Maybe it's 1 in 6 men. I think the actual statistic is 1 in 6, and that is what's reported. It's 1 in 3 women. So my apologies for saying that earlier in the video. It's 1 in 6 men, and that's what's reported. But I guarantee you that it's a lot less. It's more like 1 in 3 because a lot of men don't report it. A lot of men don't report what has happened. And it's something that I do not want my son to experience. So how does that affect me as a child or as a father? It makes me trust people less. In a weird way, I have this challenge with trust, with letting my son, like thinking about my son having a babysitter. Will that babysitter do funky things to him? Because I know men in which that's happened to, that's affected them seriously. What about if they go and stay over at a friend's house? What about if they're walking home from school one day and something happens? What if it's a teacher? What if it's this? That's where my mind constantly goes. The second thing, the way in which it affects me is like I'm at a park playing with kids. Do the parents think that is what I'm going for by being so energetic, by being so loving towards their children, by being so open and playful and wanting to play with them? Is that what they're thinking? That's what goes through my mind. And so I have to learn to let go, learn to trust, learn to be okay with Lincoln possibly experiencing that. Be okay knowing that could happen to him. Which is hard to do. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do. And for me as well. Like, it's closed me off in so many ways because it's like, it was someone I loved and trusted. Someone I loved and trusted so deeply. Took advantage of that power. And did that. So now for me to open up and be loving or to receive love has been a challenge. And so it's also been a challenge with Lincoln. Because there's been thoughts like, oh, what's going to happen? What if people think that that's what's going to happen because now they know my story? What if people are thinking that I'm doing this to Lincoln because now they know my story? Because supposedly if it happens to you, you're more likely to repeat it. That is a story that is being played out, which possibly could be true, which I believe to be true. Unless you do the work to heal, unless you're conscious of what happened and you're willing to go through and do the work. But it scares me. It scares me, and I wanted to share that because I want to be more real with you guys every single day. And I want to give you guys an into my world and what it's like to be me. And I want, if anyone out there is experiencing these things as a father and maybe not sharing about them, or maybe maybe you haven't even shared that it's happened to you, or maybe you don't even know if it's happened. Maybe you do know and you have shared. Wicked beautiful. Like, if you ever need anything, please reach out. Please let me know. Because I think that this is something that needs to be talked about. It's something that needs to be expressed. It's something that needs to be shared. Like, this was the whole theme of the TED Talk that I was doing. The more that we share these secrets that we're holding on to, the more that we realize that each and every single one of us is in this game together, the more that we realize that we are all one, that we're all going through the same shit. And the more that we normalize all the shit that we've gone through, the more that we can heal through that and become who we want to be. Which I believe is just to be more loving and more kind and more open and more caring and more respectable and more respectful and more beautiful and more of a warrior and more embodied and more authentic. So, and if you have experienced it, you're not alone. You're not alone. You got me. I know a bunch of other men who've experienced similar. Just know that you're not alone. Because when I first started my journey, I often felt like I was alone. I felt like I was the only one in the world that happened to, and I think that's why I didn't share it. And as soon as I started to talk about it, as soon as I started to share it, only then did I realize that I wasn't alone. And that's what I want to do today. So, yeah, I love you guys. And thank you for being on this journey with me, figuring this out. Figuring this whole thing we call parenting out, this whole game of life we call life, this infinite game. It's beautiful. And so are you. So much love. I'll see you guys I'm sure on another video, and I'm sure this will come up to be talked about, be shared about, to express in the future. But I just felt like it was time to get it out there because I guess I'm tired of not sharing my truth and not sharing the most authentic version of myself, because this is me. My name's Ethan Ellis, and I fucking love you, myself, and the world. Bye, guys. So beautiful over here, man.